Welcome back. This particular topic is very specific. We're going to be talking about what is it that you specifically do to prepare for the AZ-104 exam. And I've listed out, I don't know, maybe 8 bullet points here. And we're going to go through these and kind of talk about resources to use to get yourself through that. Well, the first one is maybe a little bit master the obvious. Take this class. So we've meticulously gone through and updated this class. The last run that we did, which was September 30th. And I think, each time we've gone through the class, we go through and update the class if there's any changes to the exams. So the last run of the class and this run of the class, there's no changes to the exams. So it's essentially going to be about the same. But as we go through the content and prepare for the class, we see, oh, they updated this, they updated this, they updated this about the actual content. So it's really good on the cloud classes, the Azure classes, any of the other classes that are based around technologies that are moving very quickly, AI type of classes, to get a live delivery about every couple months so that as instructors are like, okay, well, what's changed? And then we take very careful notes of that. If the exams change, we go back into the drawing board essentially and redo as much as we need to make sure that you're getting the latest and greatest version of the class to the most current information that you have. So taking this class, a live version of the class or a recently recorded live version of the class is going to be really, really your first step. So we're essentially assuming that you're going to be doing that part because you're here. Now, access the recordings as needed. Now, in today's class, this session, it's essentially 2 videos. But as we get deeper into the class, we're going to see a much higher frequency rate of videos where the title of the video is a topic. The video is about that topic as long as it needs to be. And then there's going to be another topic. So there's going to be instances of this class where there might be 4 or 5 videos just in one class session. And you can go back and search directly for what you're looking for that you feel like you want to review and take advantage of that. So you take the live class and then you have access to the videos to review what you need. And you can put the speed on fast forward, speed 2 times or 1.75, whatever makes sense that you can get the material and still understand whatever the instructor is saying. I talked about this in the first part. It's vital that you create a Microsoft Learn account and you sign in and you go through all of the Microsoft Learn content. And you want to definitely, and I put a link in on the last part of class to the exam page. The exam page, they're going to give you any relevant information about this exam, when it's updated, what they updated, what are the changes that they made. If you are preparing for this exam right now, we're teaching to the last update of the exam, which is October of 2023. Like I said, it's very old. I'm teaching an MS-102 class in about a month. That class, they just updated the exam January 30th. Okay, so, trying to make sure to stay on top of that sometimes is challenging. In this case, it's very similar to what we had before, but there have been some updates to the actual product. So therefore, they've updated the Microsoft Learn content, and therefore, hopefully, they've added that they haven't updated the objectives, which is typically when they update the exam, they update objectives, but most likely they've updated some of the questions that you may encounter. Clearly go through all of the Microsoft Learn content. This is a vital part of your experience. Each one of these, as I said, once you sign in, and you go through that section when you finish a learning path. And so the learning path is made up of 1 or more modules, typically 4 to 6 modules. Each module will have a number of units. It's not an insignificant amount of material that you'll need to go through. When you're done, and if you take the knowledge check, you successfully pass it, that means you can feel comfortable that you process the material in that learning path, in that module, in those units. then you'll get a completed indicator in your Microsoft Learn account. So you can see I actually did all of this content. There's no way, like, that's not Photoshop. I actually did do all that. And you can go back and retake content as needed as well, again, like the videos. Then on the exam page, they have something called a practice assessment. That practice assessment is a gold mine, okay? So the practice assessment, this is completely separate from the practice exams, which you also want to take. This is on the exam page. The practice assessment is about 50 questions. It takes about between 30 minutes and an hour, and you just go through, and it's not as difficult. The questions aren't as difficult as they are in the exam, but they tend to be a little bit more challenging than the knowledge checks. And this assessment, when you're getting really high grades on the assessment, like 80, 90% or above consistently, that's a good indicator when you're really ready to go take this exam. The assessment itself, that assessment, when you get this certification, you have to renew it every year. And the way they have you renew it is they have you take an assessment. I'm pretty sure it's the exact same assessment, but that's what you have to do to keep your certification current. Now, on your portal, on your StormWind portal, you'll see that there's an icon that says Practice Exam. You first have to request access to it. And if we make the practice exam, it'll say start, and it will launch our version of the practice exam. In this case, we have a practice exam provider, and you want to be getting on the practice exams 90% or better consistently, honestly, at least twice. So remember, these are two totally different things. Microsoft Learn provides the assessment, and then we provide you access to either our own homemade or a trusted practice exam provider. And those are different. The questions are different. The approaches are different. The practice exams are going to be much closer to what you're going to encounter on the actual exam. The assessment is going to be helping you to assess whether you have the knowledge around all of the different exam objectives. You want to be scoring very high on those before you sit down for the exam. Do not be discouraged if you go to do this and you're like 30%. That's just where you are, and you just can only get better from there. So the practice assessments, the practice exams, and in this class, this is an absolute must. Scott, you get points and badges for completing modules. It's just an achievement. Or does Microsoft offer incentives for the points or badges? Scott asked that on the Microsoft Learn content. I have quite a few badges. I'm completely unaware of anything other than me getting those badges and being stoked when I look at them. There are some things you can share, like they'll say share on social media, if that's something you want to do, or like your LinkedIn profile. They do have things like that, but I'm not aware of any reward directly related to the badge other than your personal satisfaction or recognition. Good question. The labs. Do all the labs at least twice. The labs are awesome in this class. They start off deceivingly simple and get to levels of almost absurd level, almost like the absurd level. I'm going to go to my demo machine here, and I'm going to pull up my trusty. Okay, I can close that and close this, and here we go. This is a link to a page which I find to be extremely helpful. So I'm going to put this link to a lab page that's easy to navigate. Microsoft Learn publishes all of the labs up on GitHub. So you can see that this is at microsoftlearning.github.io. But this particular page is kind of a gold mine because you can come here, you can click on the lab, and then it kind of has a menu, right? A little table of contents. And you can go through this step-by-step version of a lab. At the end of these labs, they have a couple of sections. One of them says extend your learning with Copilot, and then they recommend passing in these prompts to Copilot. And I got to tell you, I really do like that. So I'll show you like the little website I made. I have this drop down and I can go through like the labs. These are the GitHub Markdown labs. I have them converted to HTML. And then I went ahead and I actually used ChatGPT because I just like the ChatGPT version better than the Copilot ones personally, which is ironic because Copilot's a Microsoft product. But these three prompts, what are the Azure, PowerShell, and CLI commands? Create a security group called IT admins, provide step-by-step strategy for managing users and groups. So those are the additional topics. And this is what it gave me. I made a web page out of it. It's my own little study guide. And it's really, really cool. Like that is a hidden gem on these lab instructions. You can create these extra little study tools, which are great. Another thing that you can do is you can use Copilot to give you exam questions like, hey, give me 5 multiple choice questions on, and then pass in, some information from one of the objectives, and it will do that for you. And you can create your own practice tests. Also, Microsoft, these labs, they have links to the articles that are directly in support in the Microsoft Learn content of whatever this lab is, which is amazing. And then, let's see, I don't think this lab, does it have this? Most of the labs, not all the labs, most of the labs, so let me go to another one. Oops, here. I'm going to go to, let's see, the Module 2. Okay, Module 2 has this. Module 2. Most of the labs have a section here called Interactive Lab Simulations. You want to do all of these, and I found these to be so useful. These are step-by-step guided practices through everything that you're probably going to do on that particular lab, and then sometimes they're additionals, they have more. I made my own little web page here where I could select a module, and I just put all of those. You don't need to do this. This is just this is how ridiculous I am when I'm preparing for something. But the point is that they will actually have like these diagrams, which they provide in the labs, and then they have you go, and that's what you're created. A lot of these labs, this is what you're doing. So you can see it's pretty sophisticated, the stuff that you're doing in this class. Like, it's no joke. And are these on the StormWind site? No, David, the stuff that I'm showing you right there, anything I'm showing you that's on this is my own personal study site that I made. It's not a StormWind site. What is on the StormWind site are the practice exams and the labs, links to the lab provider. And then that page I gave you, that is the actual lab instructions. I had them on Markdown. I converted them to HTML so I could put them on my own website and make my own study page. But that one web page that I gave you the link to, this is super helpful, because notice that on the slide I said do all the labs at least twice. I would may we have access to the .cloud site? I don't know, because this is like my own personal site, and I have a password protected, so it's really just like my own thing. I just have all my resources in one place, so when I'm teaching the class, I can point to different stuff. It's not really made for public consumption. How's that? So I'm gonna say no, but only because it's not made for public consumption. Okay, so one of the things that I do when I'm making websites for fun is so I comment my code. Some of the comments are not ready for prime time, because I'm trying to make myself laugh. So I haven't gone through and done that. Okay, so the page is like a workbook text for the labs. Yes, that's a Microsoft provided page. That the page that you see pictured behind me that I gave you a link to, that's literally a Microsoft provided page. If you actually go to github.com, so if I go to here, if I go to github.com and I do a search for AZ-104, Microsoft Learning provides all of the lab instructions in their GitHub repository, which is awesome, by the way. But if I go to instructions and then I go to labs, here they all are. Like I can click on these and they're great. But I just personally, I think that lab page is way better. Like I find this way easier to consume like this personally. So, you have access to GitHub. Again, I didn't have to sign in or anything. It's all free. That's all available. The reason that I use this page here, this one here, is because in preparing for the AZ-104, what I recommend doing is you don't have to do this right off the bat because our lab provider, they have the instructions inside the screen while you're doing your labs. The idea is that after you've done all the labs, then you get a development or testing environment. Do not do any of this stuff in productions. This is like global stuff. It also will cost money. You will be creating resources that cost money. But one of the things that they'll do is they'll say, all right, at the end, so I just happen to click on one of them. At the end, it will say, all right, so you created all these resources. Now you need to go through and basically remove the resources at the end, which is typically here. Do not run this in production. I guess there's been a couple of classes where people have been running the labs and then they go do the cleanup resources and they do like delete all my groups. And you're all like, whoops, don't do this in production. This is for demo. But our labs, the lab provider will give you an environment. They'll give you a cloud account. They'll give you the resources associated with that account necessary to complete the labs. Then you go through and clean up the resources. Knowing those scripts is also helpful for the exam. But when you've done all that, again, I like to do all the labs at least twice, at least once through our lab provider, and you're done. Then you have access to these labs pages. You want to be able to have a testing and development environment. And then you want to be able to go through and do these labs. Of course, you'll have to adjust the names to your own scenario. Like it's not going to be Contoso anymore. It'll be whatever you name your tenancy. You have to make some mental adjustments to some of the instructions. But the actual being able to create these things using the instructions or even the diagrams, that's going to be a level that you can feel mastery to feel very confident when you sit this exam or even have to do that in real life. And these instructions are so good that on some of the more complex scenarios, creating trust between on-prem and in the cloud, it's nice to have those instructions. They can be very, very useful for that in the real practical world as well. So do the labs at least twice. Feel comfortable with all of the stuff that you encounter on the labs. And again, one of them through our lab provider, please take advantage of that. The second one, do in a testing and dev environment. Do not do in production, please. So we all need to register a domain so we can create test environment in Azure. That's David's question. You do not have to register a domain because when you create a tenancy, Microsoft automatically assigns you a .onmicrosoft.com domain. But to do some of the more advanced things in the labs, yeah, you'll want to have a domain that you have access to the public DNS to so that you can assign a domain name to that. For example, the website that I made for myself, part of my exercise for this was to map this to a publicly available domain. So I have the domain controlflowcorp.cloud. That's a public domain. And so this is an Azure web app. If I go behind the scenes and I go to portal.azure.com, in Azure, this is an Azure web app. It's a static web app. If I go to my resource group, web apps, and I go to my AZ-104 web app, this web app, I've mapped it to this domain, but when I first created it, Microsoft, when I first created the app, before I did that, it's mapped to this. Oh, that's my workflow. It's mapped to just like this random domain that they make up, which I think they're using. Let's see if I have this. Let's see, domains. I think they're using containers. I'm almost positive. Yeah, the domain they gave me initially was white-tree, blah, 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 blah. If I copy that and I paste that in the URL, I have my password protected. That's the site. See, this is the original domain. So you don't have to have a domain, but part of the skills you want to leave this class with is being able to have an Azure static web app, having access to the public DNS for a publicly available domain, excuse me, and then mapping those accordingly. So yeah, David, I would suggest that you do get at least one or two, super expensive, like 1 penny domains. You can even register domains in Azure, but that's something you don't have to have that to do the labs on your own, but it's probably a good idea to be able to have access to that. So it's not free. So for me, I delete my resources pretty quickly. And even some of the resources I make in this class, usually for this, when I'm teaching the AZ-104 and I'm creating a bunch of resources during the next 2 weeks, generally speaking, I'll probably go up to where I'm spending $70 a month, sometimes a little bit more, depending on if I forget to delete something after a class that day. So great question. Now, be comfortable with the Azure CLI, with PowerShell and Bash versions for all the commands they have you do in the labs. Be comfortable with those. Be comfortable with ARM templates. Be able to read and understand if it's in JSON. Be able to read and understand if you get that in a Bicep version. You'll have access to all that stuff in the labs and in the class. Become familiar, if you can, with something called James Path. So let's see, I got to actually go to a different thing up here. I'm going to find my link to my James Path tutorial. I have a screenshot of the page, but there's actually a really good James Path page. Where are you, James? There we go. It's the James Path specification. I don't know, probably a guy named James made it up. So I'm going to paste that here. All right. This is awesome. It had, I know it's so much like, well, I got to learn that too. I would recommend going through this tutorial. So I'm going to put this up in the chat and put on here a James Path tutorial. And I recommend going through that. And I think if you just go through this tutorial, it's not super heavy. It'll probably take you, depending on your experience with programming and how much you start enjoying this, probably like 2 to 3 hours of your life at a relaxed pace, and you'll know everything you need for this exam. On the stuff you do in the labs, you're going to get plenty of experience with Bicep and JSON ARM templates. That's going to be even way more important for this exam. The Azure CLI, this is definitely something that you will need to know about for this exam. Let me go over here. I'm going to switch to see shell.azure.com. You can launch the Azure CLI right from anywhere in the Azure portal, or you can go to shell.azure.com and you get more of a full screen experience. So when you see me doing demos in the shell, you'll probably see me going here. And there are 2 versions. One is Bash and one is PowerShell, so you can switch back and forth. Most of the time, for me, I'm in the Azure portal. I'm in some place in the Azure portal, like my website, and I need to do something. I'll go ahead and launch by just clicking that icon, wherever you see that PowerShell icon. That will launch it right on the page. And in my experience, that's where I've done it most of the time. In the lab, you'll learn how to work with all these toolbars here, which are good lessons. But fairly recently, I've been like, you know what? I'm just going to go to shell.azure.com and then do some examples from here. So I'll probably do demos in both. in this class, and definitely for the labs, you'll be doing most of them from inside the Azure portal versus shell.azure.com. That's not as important as knowing the basic commands that you get exposed to in the labs and on the slides for the Azure CLI, both the Bash version and the PowerShell version. You'll definitely want to become familiar with ARM templates. ARM templates are JSON files, and then they're written in JSON, JavaScript object notation. And what happens is the JSON files, for some reason, people were like, oh man, it's so hard to read. And so some people over at Microsoft, I believe, they developed an awesome language, which is essentially an abstraction from the JSON templates. And Bicep is easier to read. It's easier to understand. It's less wordy. If you had a JSON ARM template describing an environment with 5 virtual machines, it might be several hundred lines. The Bicep file that would do the same thing might be 100 lines. Behind the scenes, the Bicep file compiles to and generates JSON templates to interact with the system. But you'll want to know both of these. We'll cover these for sure in this class. And then again, that James path, I already showed you guys the link. Those are all like kind of things you want to know about as far as scripting and language wise. The actual exam itself, you have 100 minutes and you actually can, like I said, launch the Microsoft Learn content while you're taking the exam. It's a little icon at the bottom of your screen, and then you click on it and it launches it. So if this is my exam screen, it will insert basically a window. You can launch them and they'll be side by side. You can take either one of those full screen. You can only go into Microsoft Learn, and knowing how to navigate between the modules and the learning paths and the drop downs and the units, that can be very helpful because they don't give you more time. If you have 100 minutes and you decide to spend 60 of them on that Microsoft Learn website, you're probably not going to finish the exam. So keep that in mind. That's going to be really important. Now, we broke this class up into 10 modules. Today, we did this one. Today, we did the introduction. And you know, like there's a lot, right? There's about the exam, there's the topics, there's the objectives, there's all of the tools you have, what I recommend that you do to get ready for the exam and the job role. And then the rest are going to be directly related to specific areas of the objectives as we dive in. So tomorrow we're going to be going very deep on managing Entra ID. We're going to go into subscriptions, RBAC, governance. We're over the next 7 sessions, we're going to cover 11 modules. So sometimes we'll cover more than one in a day. Most of the time it'll be about one a day. And each one of those might have anywhere between 2 to 7 to 8 topic videos within them. So there's a lot of stuff that we're going to cover in here. You have access to a whole bunch of resources. I recommend definitely making the request for the practice exams, making the request for the actual labs and beginning those. As far as this week, like if you were going to be starting the labs and trying to kind of do the labs while you go through the class, I'd recommend trying to get through, you know, the Microsoft Entra labs. And so when we talk about that, if I go to my demo machine and I go to the lab page here, let me go to this one. Sorry about that. Here, the first labs are going to be this here, identity, subscriptions, and governance. So as you'll see as we go through the class, it'll make sense if you're following along. You can start your lab environment and then save it or pause it, because what they do is they break each lab. In your lab environment, you're going to see that they have one button per labs, and there's 11 labs, but some of them have an A and a B. So one button will have 2A and 2B. One button will have, you know, I don't know why it's 3B, and then 4 and 5. So you'll see on the lab screen, you'll have several of those. Let's see if I can launch my lab environment. Hang on one second. I'll see if I can do that. Where are you? Yeah. I'm going to log on to the lab environment so that you can see what it looks like in our provider. For this class, we're using something called Extreme Labs, right? So this is what it looks like. So the very first lab that you would do would be the Manage Azure Active Directory Identities. See, they don't change it to Enter ID sometimes. And you would click this and it would launch and take the lab. In their lab environment, in the lab environment provided for fairly obvious reasons security-wise, some of the steps that you're asked to do, you can't even do in their environment. Like, you won't be able to do them. And they essentially put a disclaimer, says some of these steps you can't do for permissions-wise because they'd require too many permissions in their tenancy. But when you have your own tenancy, you can do everything. Just keep in mind that you will be doing some things that do cost money. So wherever you see to get practice, you can do these guided interactive lab simulations, and the links are right there on the actual lab instructions. I'd highly recommend doing those, maybe even creating your own like Word document that says, okay, just like here's all the links, or Excel spreadsheet, or if you do web programming, or bookmark them and go through those a couple times. Those ones don't cost any money, okay, because they're just basically guided video walkthroughs, and they're awesome. They're absolutely awesome. So does anybody have any questions about anything that we covered today? We covered actually quite a bit of material. I really sincerely hope that everybody was able to get in. I know that must have been very frustrating, obviously, Maureen. So I hope you're okay and you got in there okay. I don't see your name up there. But that's actually all we're going to cover today. I don't want to go any more than that. So today's probably the one day you'll get out a little bit early, and hopefully you'll be able to take that extra time to request labs through our support team and request practice exams, and start to maybe take some time to become familiar with those two environments. You know, that way you still have some time, but the lecture itself is done for today. I'm actually going to end it. I don't see any more questions. We'll see you hopefully tomorrow. We're going to be jumping deep into Enter ID, having a lot of fun. Thank you guys. Thanks for all the great questions, and we will see you guys tomorrow. Have a great day. Make sure to request all that stuff through your portal so that you can begin working through the practice exams and the labs, become familiar with what you need to do and how you need to do it, get all that set up. Have a great day. See everybody tomorrow, hopefully. All right, take care.